Daniel Morris never imagined that a stuck garage door would drag him into a battle for his home. But Patricia Hale had a way of turning the smallest inconvenience into a weapon, and she wasn't about to stop until she owned a piece of his property. Patricia Hale arrived in the neighborhood with an energy that made people take notice, though not necessarily in a good way. Her car, a sleek black SUV, rolled slowly down the street on that first day, her eyes scanning each property as though she were taking mental notes of every imperfection. She introduced herself to a few neighbors, smiling in a way that felt more like a formality than genuine warmth. Daniel Morris noticed her from across the street while unloading groceries from his truck. He didn't think much of it at first. New neighbors came and went over the years, and the community had always been fairly peaceful, but Patricia's arrival marked the beginning of a change, one that seemed to sweep through the street almost overnight. Within days, the first of many printed notices appeared taped to mailboxes and doors. They were printed on heavy paper with the HOA logo at the top, the kind of thing that looked official enough to make people pause before opening them. The violations were strange in their precision. A neighbor down the street was cited for leaving their garbage bins visible for 3 extra minutes past collection time. Another was told to remove a hanging basket of flowers because it was not uniform with the rest of the community's appearance. It wasn't just the rules, it was the way they were enforced. The letters read like judgments, not friendly reminders. Daniel had lived in his 2-story home for over a decade, raising his daughter there and enjoying the quiet rhythms of the neighborhood. He kept his property neat, his lawn trimmed, and his home painted in HOA-approved colors. He had never been the subject of a violation in all his years. But that changed one warm spring morning when his garage door, which had been acting up for weeks, jammed halfway as he tried to close it. The heavy panel groaned to a stop, leaving an awkward gap that exposed the shadowy space inside. It wasn't a major issue, and he figured he could fix it on the weekend when he had more time. By the next morning, an envelope was taped firmly to his front door. The letter inside was short but cold. It stated that his garage door posed a visual disruption to the community and that he was required to correct the issue within 48 hours. It also warned that continued non-compliance could result in fines or further action. Daniel read it twice, frowning. It seemed excessive for a simple mechanical problem, but he assumed it was just the HOA following procedure. He planned to fix the door the next day and thought that would be the end of it. The odd thing was how quickly Patricia seemed to know about the problem. She lived directly across the street, and Daniel wondered if she had noticed it while coming or going. What he didn't realize at the time was that Patricia's new role as HOA president, something she assumed within just days of moving in, came with a determination to make her presence known. Her focus seemed to rest on finding flaws, no matter how small, and correcting them with swift, visible action. That evening, as Daniel stepped outside to water the plants in his front yard, he saw Patricia standing near the curb on her side of the street, clipboard in hand. She wasn't trying to hide the fact that she was watching him. Her gaze kept flicking toward his open garage, lingering on the stuck panel. It felt less like a neighbor taking interest and more like an inspection. Daniel went back inside with an uneasy feeling in his chest, unaware that this minor inconvenience with his garage door would spiral into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The neighborhood seemed quiet, but there was a new kind of tension in the air, one that hinted at rules being enforced not for the sake of harmony, but as a tool of control. Daniel was about to learn just how far Patricia was willing to go to make sure her version of the neighborhood became the only version that mattered. The following week began quietly, with Daniel going about his usual routine. He had tightened the bolts on the garage door track and tested the springs, hoping to get it to close smoothly. The door was heavy, the metal cold under his hands, but after some effort he managed to get it all the way down. Satisfied, he thought the problem was solved. That sense of relief didn't last long. That it was late in the afternoon when the door jammed again. The gap it left wasn't large, but it was enough for anyone passing by to notice. Daniel decided to leave it for the evening and finish the repair in the morning when there was more daylight. The sun was starting to set, painting the street in warm tones, and the neighborhood was calm. It should have been an ordinary evening, but just as he was locking the side gate, the faint sound of a voice calling to someone drifted across the street. When he glanced up, Patricia was standing on her front lawn, phone in hand, her eyes fixed on him. Minutes later, the quiet was shattered by the sharp wail of a siren. The sound grew louder until a police cruiser turned the corner and stopped in front of Daniel's house. Another followed close behind. The flashing lights bathed the street in red and blue, catching the attention of curious neighbors who stepped onto their porches. Daniel froze for a moment, confused, then walked toward the officers as they climbed out of their cars. They scanned the property, their hands resting near their belts, moving with the cautious precision of people expecting trouble. As they approached, Daniel realized Patricia had crossed the street and was speaking rapidly to one of them. Though he couldn't hear the words clearly, he caught fragments, phrases like suspicious activity and possible break-in. It was absurd. He lived here, in this house, and had for years. There was no one else involved, no forced entry, just a stubborn garage door that wouldn't close properly. But the look on Patricia's face was intense, as though she believed or wanted to believe that she had just stopped a crime in progress. The officers spoke briefly to Daniel, asking him for identification and confirming his address. Their tone was professional, but it was clear they were following up on a report that sounded serious. Once the facts were clarified, they seemed satisfied that nothing criminal was taking place. Still, the moment left a lingering sting. Having police cars parked outside his home for all the neighbors to see wasn't something he would forget quickly. As the officers drove away, Daniel glanced back toward Patricia's house. She was already retreating inside, her phone still in her hand. There was no wave, no apology, only the quiet closing of her front door. That night, he found it hard to sleep, replaying the scene over and over. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate move, the start of something more personal. The next morning, his suspicion deepened when he found another envelope taped to his door. The letter inside stated that concerning behavior had been observed and would be noted in the HOA's official record for his property. It warned that repeated incidents could lead to additional actions, including the possibility of legal involvement. The words were carefully chosen, vague enough to be unchallengeable but heavy with implication. Daniel read the letter twice before setting it down. This was no longer about a malfunctioning garage door. It was about someone watching, waiting, and documenting every move. The air in the neighborhood felt different now, tighter somehow, as though invisible lines had been drawn. Daniel knew Patricia was on one side of that line, and she was determined to make sure he was on the other. 2 weeks passed without another police visit, but the tension didn't fade. Daniel kept his garage door closed as much as possible, avoiding any excuse for Patricia to take notice. Still, a feeling of being watched never left him. He would catch glimpses of her blinds shifting when he came home from work, or see her lingering by her mailbox longer than necessary whenever he stepped outside. It wasn't overt enough to confront, but it was persistent, like a shadow that refused to disappear. One afternoon, a knock came at his door. The delivery driver stood holding a thin, flat package that required a signature. The return address was a law firm he didn't recognize. Inside the cardboard sleeve was a neatly folded letter on heavy cream paper, the HOA logo embossed at the top. The language was formal, almost sterile, but the message was sharp. The garage door incident had allegedly caused measurable damage to neighborhood property values and had negatively impacted the community's visual appeal. The letter cited multiple sections of the HOA's governing documents, each one twisted to apply to the situation. The demands came next. He was instructed to pay $15,000 in impact fees to compensate for this supposed harm, or, as an alternative, to sign over a portion of his side yard to the HOA for community improvement projects. The idea that his small patch of grass could somehow fix the neighborhood's property value crisis was laughable. But the legal jargon made the situation feel heavier. It wasn't phrased as a suggestion, it was an ultimatum. Daniel placed the letter on his kitchen counter and paced the room. He had lived here for over 10 years without a single violation or complaint. He had paid his dues, kept his property in good order, and followed the rules. Now, because of a stubborn garage door, he was facing a demand for thousands of dollars or part of his land. It didn't make sense. Unless, he realized, this wasn't about the garage door at all. In the days that followed, he quietly asked a few neighbors if they had ever received similar letters. Most were hesitant to talk, glancing over their shoulders before giving vague answers. A retired couple down the street mentioned, almost in a whisper, that they had once been pressured into paying for aesthetic improvements after an HOA complaint. Another resident hinted that Patricia had been involved in situations like this before, though they didn't go into detail. The common thread was fear. Nobody wanted to be the next target. Daniel began to piece things together. Patricia's interest in his side yard wasn't random. That narrow strip of grass ran alongside the edge of the neighborhood and connected to a small, undeveloped greenbelt. He had heard talk at past HOA meetings about turning that green space into a playground or picnic area, but it had never gone anywhere. If the HOA owned his side yard, they could connect it to the greenbelt, and start construction. It would be a visible, high-profile project one Patricia could claim as her achievement. The more Daniel thought about it, the clearer it became that the garage door incident was just a convenient excuse. Patricia had found her leverage, and now she was applying pressure, using official-looking documents and legal threats to push him toward compliance. He knew that giving in would only encourage more demands, but resisting could lead to a drawn-out battle he wasn't sure he could afford that night. As the wind rattled the tree branches outside his window, Daniel sat at his desk and read the letter again. The numbers were bold, the consequences spelled out in neat bullet points. It was designed to make him feel small and outnumbered, but beneath the intimidation, he sensed something else: urgency. Patricia wanted his land, and she wanted it soon. He didn't know why the timing mattered, but he knew one thing for certain: if he didn't figure out her next move, she would make his decision for him. Daniel spent the next several days combing through every document he had from the HOA. Old meeting minutes, newsletters, and archived notices were stacked in piles across his dining table. At first, he was looking for any mention of property lines or greenbelt projects, but soon he noticed something else: patterns. Patricia's name appeared in older meeting records from neighborhoods miles away. In each one, she had served on the HOA board, often as president, and each time there was a period of aggressive enforcement that ended with her departure and a few disgruntled former homeowners selling their properties. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to convince him she had done this before. By the middle of the week, Daniel's curiosity had shifted into suspicion. The more he dug, the more it became clear that his side yard wasn't just a small strip of grass. To Patricia, it was a key piece in a plan she had been building from the moment she moved in. If she gained control of his property, she could expand the HOA's territory into the greenbelt, giving her the perfect opportunity to announce a new community project. The project would likely win her support from the board, justify increased HOA fees, and, if history repeated itself, give her control over the revenue the new amenities brought in. One night, while taking his trash bins to the curb, Daniel noticed a dark SUV idling down the street. The headlights were off, but the faint glow of a dashboard screen was visible inside. The next evening, it was back, different spot, same quiet presence. Then came the cameras. At first it was a neighbor walking their dog who paused too long in front of his house, holding up a phone. Later he spotted a man leaning against a car 2 houses down, aiming a camera lens toward his driveway. They weren't trying to break in. They were collecting something: images, evidence, moments that could be twisted into violations. It dawned on him that Patricia was building a case. She didn't need to prove he had done anything illegal. She only had to gather enough documented incidents to present to the board and the HOA's lawyer. With that, she could justify fines, penalties, and eventually a lien on his property if he didn't comply. The thought of it sent a cold wave through him. Daniel decided to test his theory. The next morning he deliberately left a small garden hose coiled loosely on his front lawn, well within reason, but visible from the street. Within hours, he noticed Patricia outside, pretending to chat with another neighbor but angling herself so she could glance at his yard. By that evening, there was another notice taped to his door, citing improper lawn equipment storage. The speed of the response confirmed what he already suspected: she was watching constantly, waiting for him to slip. The pressure was building. Letters were coming more frequently now, each one citing a different rule. His mailbox had a tiny scriptation. His hedge grew an inch taller than the approved height violation. None of them carried large fines yet, but they were stacking up in his record. He knew what came next. The board would claim he was a habitual offender, and move to impose harsher penalties. Daniel's unease shifted to determination. He began documenting everything, taking time-stamped photos of his property each day and saving every notice in a binder. He kept a log of when the strange cars appeared on his street and who was seen. With a camera, the more he gathered, the more he realized this wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about exposing the pattern. Patricia wasn't just enforcing rules. She was setting traps, baiting him into small mistakes so she could build the justification she needed. And if she had succeeded in other neighborhoods before, she knew exactly how to play the game. This time, though, she wasn't the only one keeping records. Daniel was quietly preparing for a move of his own. He didn't know if it would work, but he was running out of time to wait. Daniel knew he couldn't confront Patricia directly. That would only feed her narrative and give her more material to use against him. Instead, he focused on finding someone outside the neighborhood who could help. Late one night he came across an article about a state investigator who specialized in homeowner association misconduct. The man's name was Richard Keller, and according to the piece, he had exposed several cases where HOA boards had abused their authority to intimidate residents into surrendering property or paying excessive fees. Daniel read every word twice before sending a detailed email, attaching scans of the letters, photos of the cars, and his log of suspicious activity. He expected it to take weeks to get a response. But less than 48 hours later, Keller called. His tone was calm, methodical, and without any disbelief in Daniel's claims. This wasn't the first time he'd heard a story like this. In fact, the details fit a pattern he had seen more than once. He explained that if Patricia was misusing HOA funds or fabricating violations, it could be grounds for removal and possibly criminal charges. What Daniel needed was undeniable proof. The investigator set up an undercover inspection. 2 people posing as potential homebuyers walked the neighborhood, chatting with residents, noting the condition of homes, and subtly asking questions about the HOA. They confirmed what Daniel already knew: most people were afraid to speak openly, but a few hinted that Patricia had created a climate of fear. Some even admitted to paying fines without questioning them, just to avoid further trouble. The next week, Keller's team dug into HOA financial records. What they found was worse than Daniel had imagined. Several large transactions labeled as community beautification had no receipts or project logs attached. Funds allocated for landscaping and maintenance had been withdrawn in cash or transferred to accounts that couldn't be traced to any contractors. It was a paper trail of money quietly disappearing, and Patricia's name appeared on every authorization form. The tipping point came when Keller discovered internal HOA emails in which Patricia had discussed problem homeowners and strategies for forcing them to comply or relocate. Daniel's garage door was specifically mentioned, described as an opportunity to begin the process of reclaiming his side yard for the Greenbelt expansion. There was no more speculation, it was all written in her own words. One crisp morning, Patricia arrived at the HOA office for what she thought was a routine board meeting. Instead, Keller and 2 state officials were waiting. They presented her with the evidence outlining the financial irregularities, the fabricated violations, and the targeted harassment. Witness statements and Daniel's own meticulously kept records were included. Patricia's composure cracked for the first time as she realized this wasn't a confrontation she could control. By the end of the day, she was formally removed as HOA president and placed under investigation for harassment, fraud, and misappropriation of funds. The rest of the board resigned quietly over the next week, unwilling to face the same scrutiny. Without leadership, the HOA's aggressive enforcement stopped overnight. The threatening letters ceased, the strange cars disappeared, and the street returned to its quiet routine. Daniel kept his property intact, his side yard untouched, and his garage door finally fixed without interference. Still, the experience left its mark. Daniel installed security cameras around his home, not out of paranoia, but as a reminder that even the smallest spark a jammed garage door could ignite a much larger fire. He had seen how easily power could be twisted into a weapon and how quickly a peaceful neighborhood could become a battleground. The victory was his, but the war had been closer than he ever wanted to admit.